possible. Now, to begin things, I got to set the scene for you a little bit. If you'll remember, the nation of Israel, the first king they ever had was King Saul. And King Saul was a good guy and a family man, but he did not really care about God. He cared about his power. And over a period of time, God came to a point where he said, all right, David, you're not a great guy, but you love me, and you want to follow me. And every time you mess up, you keep turning back to me. And so God comes, and he has David anointed as king. Now, apparently, God has a little chronology problem, because Saul was still officially the king when he anointed David. Not only this, but Saul was about 45, 50 years old, and David was 18 when he was anointed as the king. Now think about that for a minute. That's like somebody walks into the place where you're working, fresh out of high school, still not quite having to shave every day, and they walk in and they go, okay, I'm in charge now. You know how that's going to work. That's basically the situation. God apparently thought it'd be much better for David to run around in the desert for a good 10, 15 years, running away from Saul, trying to chase him down and make sure that he wasn't the next king. In the course of this, David becomes best friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. They pledge their lives to each other. They pledge eternal friendship. Jonathan is the heir apparent, and nevertheless, he turns over to David. He knows David's going to be the next king. He knows David's been anointed. He knows that David has the hand of God on him. But still, he says, I'm going to pledge myself to you. I'm going to be your #1 soldier. I'm going to follow you. I'm not going to stand in the way when the time comes and Dad steps down. You're going to be king. Of course, what actually happens is that Saul and his army, including his sons, are all defeated by the Philistines. David rises up to power, gathers the nation of Israel to himself, and they defeat the Philistines. They throw them out of the land. David goes to battle after battle after battle with the different nations surrounding Israel, and he secures a measure of peace. And it's in this time, as he's got a measure of peace, in this time where he's built his palace, and he has not just military might, but political might in that area, where his kingdom has begun to amass wealth. And as he is sitting there, waiting and wondering and talking with God and feeling the power of God's blessing, he begins to think to himself about his old friend Jonathan. And so this is what happens in 2 Samuel chapter 9. Then David said, is there anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. And they called him to David. And the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, I am your servant. The king said, is there anyone of the house of Saul to whom they may show the kindness of God? And Ziba said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan who is crippled in both feet. So the king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, behold, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo-Debar. Now, a little bit earlier in the scripture, we actually meet this son of Jonathan for the first time. When the terrible battle occurs, and the Philistines kill Saul, and they kill Jonathan, and they kill the main bulk of his army at that point. During that time, Jonathan's nurse scoops him up and runs off with him, trying to bring him into hiding. She falls, and he's injured in the fall, and becomes crippled in both feet. One of the things about the ancient culture at this time is that because of that injury and the fact that he never recovered from it, this son of Jonathan could never be considered to be king. That physical imperfection, that inability to lead his troops into battle meant that he could never be king. He would never be considered a part of his succession, that he could not ascend to that place. Also, within the culture of that time, any sort of a disability was looked upon as the disfavor of God. That people who were disabled, they were that way because God didn't like them, because they must have sinned somehow, they must have done something wrong. 1,000 years later, we see the disciples taking the same assumption when they come up to a man born blind and they ask Jesus, why is this man born blind? Was it his sin or his parents' sin? And Jesus then, even as he did at this time and period, even as the attitude of God was towards the dead, he says, no, no, no. It's not because of anybody's sin. It's so that God would be glorified, and then he promptly heals the blind man. We have a tendency as human beings to interpret disability, pain, sorrow, problems in life as the displeasure of God. And within this culture, that would continue to be the same. this individual, Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, would be considered to be the lowest of the low, would be considered to be barely human because of the disabilities that he is suffering. And even his lineage of being an inheritor, a son, a grandson of the king, and a son of Jonathan, still would not overcome that. That might be the reason he was able to be kept alive and that people sheltered him. But he was not considered a candidate to be king. And so David finds out about this, and when he brings Ziba to him, Ziba thinks he knows what's going on. The normal sort of way that things worked at this time period is that whenever a new sovereign, a new king took over a kingdom, he would make sure that everybody that could possibly have a claim from the previous one was exterminated. That they would go and they would find all the relatives, the second cousins, the third cousins, the great-grandchildren, everybody, and eliminate them all so that no one could contest the new monarchy. And when Ziba comes to stand before David, he's pretty sure that's what David is doing. David is finding the last of Saul's line to make sure there'll be no more rebellions, there'll be no more problems. And even in that situation, he gives up this son of Jonathan. But David isn't looking for this person to do him harm. In verse 5 it says this, Then the king David sent and brought him from the house of Malchir, the son of Amiel, from Lo-Debar. Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and prostrated himself. And David said, Mephibosheth. And he said, Here is your servant. David said to him, Do not fear, for I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall eat at my table regularly. Now think about this for a minute. What was Mephibosheth expecting? He had every reason to expect that he was being called to the palace, that he would get one or two good meals, and then he would be executed. He had every right to think that his young son, Machir, was going to follow him into death, and probably his wife as well. He had every reason to think that the summons from the king is, They finally found me. So he arrives. And there on his crutches before David stands there. David calls out his name and he falls to the floor on his face. He knows David's the king. He knows he's not. He knows that he's, by his virtue of his simple bloodline, his genealogy, that his life is forfeit. And imagine his surprise. His surprise when David reaches down, when David takes him by the shoulders and stands him up and says, Now look, this is the way it's going to be. First of all, I'm going to show you kindness because your father was my best friend. And this kindness is going to be that, first of all, everything that your grandfather had, everything that Saul owned, all the land that was cultivated, that all belongs to you now. It's yours forever. He's given him an inheritance and security and a place to someone who had none of those things, but was staying upon the kindness of another individual that wasn't even related to him. He raised him up. He says, not only are you going to have all the wealth of your grandfather Saul, all of the land and the cattle and everything else that comes with it, but you're going to eat at my table every night. That means that he's going to move Mephibosheth into the palace. That means that this small family of descendants of Saul, who used to be living out in the hinterlands trying to hide out and make sure David's soldiers didn't find them, are now in the center of the palace. And that every night they're coming down the hall to sit with David's sons and daughters at the table of the king. Not only is this an incredible picture of our own relationship to God, it's also a reminder of how God uses the power we have to reach out to those around us. David has no obligation here. He has no reason, he has nothing that he has to do or is supposed to do. And he goes out of his way to find some way to show kindness to those who were his enemies. Remember this, Saul hunted David in the desert. He and his army, they hunted him in the desert for all of those years trying to find a way to kill him. Saul personally tried to murder him twice by throwing a spear through him. Not only that, but after the great battle where Saul and Jonathan and the rest of them died, Saul's son Ishbosheth was set up by one of the generals, and he continued for another 7 years, keeping David from being king, fighting against him. If there's any house, any group, any place that David could have or should have held a grudge against, that he should have been wary of, that he should have been uncertain to be around, it would have been the family of Saul. And yet David not only benignly neglects some descendants somewhere, but David reaches out and specifically says, how can I find them and do something kind for them? Okay, I'm thinking real bird or somebody's ringtone. Those are the two. We've got a text. Anyway, all right. The point here is that when it comes to being generous, David seeks out someone who, in order to be generous to them. Now, we live in a situation, in a culture, where we are bombarded with opportunities to be generous. How many of you in the last month have gotten a call asking for a contribution to something? Okay, how many of you gotten two? How many of you gotten from the police department? Still several up, okay? We add to that what we see on the television with, Sally Struthers standing up there and, trotting out different children about how terrible their life is. That when we, and I've been dipping into the really doofy end of cable a little bit lately, and Protect the Pets, SPCA. This is not a commercial. This is like a little show that lasts 7 minutes in the middle of something you're watching. What is wrong with these people? That we, but that appeals to our generosity are everywhere around us. And one of the reasons that's the case is because everybody knows that Americans are generous. Everybody knows that we give more money per capita, we give more money together, we give more money in every different way than anybody else, anywhere else, in any other culture. They know that we do that. Now, we do that because we feel guilty, because we all know we have more stuff than we should. I would ask you to raise your hands, but it would be wrong to ask everyone to say, are there 5 things in your house that could be stolen and you wouldn't know for a year? We'd all have to raise our hands. We could probably get up to 15 or 20 things that it would take us a year to figure out, oh, that's missing, I wonder where it went. We feel guilty about that, so we give our money away. The difference here is that when we sit passively and we wait for opportunities to come to us, it's very hard to be discerning about it. It's very hard to look at it and say, okay, now I'm going to check this out, and I'm going to read up about this charity, and I'm going to look up how effective it is, and I'm going to find out how much of the money goes to administrative costs. In fact, I remember there was an article in Time magazine about a year ago about all of these different cancer research charities, and that something like 40% of them don't ever give more than 5% of the money they raise to actual laboratory work in finding out more about cancer. That all the rest of it is basically costs to raise the money, going into raising the money, which go into the costs to raise the money, and a tiny little trickle goes on. Now, that's by no means most, but there are a significant number just within that field. It's hard for us to be motivated to do the kind of research to expose that. It's hard for us to be motivated when somebody comes to us with a request. It's much easier to go, okay, well, I'll give you $20 and get them off the phone. When God talks about generosity, it's very different. This generosity is like the generosity of David, where we look and we find some way that we can help someone. Where we're actively searching for something to do to help someone else. Now, we all understand we can't help everybody. It's not possible. We could each one of us empty our entire bank account, giving things away, and we would not make a dent in worldwide poverty. We would not make a dent in even nationwide homelessness or homelessness across Hampton Roads. We could all get together and do that. It wouldn't necessarily change that. So the only way we can effectively choose to give or effectively give is to give in the way that God directs us. God is much smarter than us, and so He has a plan and a role, a place, a thing for us to do in it. In the same way, David could have given relief to everyone in his kingdom that was somehow crippled. But had he spent all the resources of the treasury doing so, it would not necessarily have helped all of them, or even most of them. He had to do what God was putting on his heart to do, and he helped this one individual and totally changed their life. In the same way, God calls us to specific acts of charity and generosity according to His plan, which allows Him to use our resources in the most effective way possible. Now, the difficulty about that is we can't just sit back and let it come to us. The difficulty about that is we can't just say, well, I give this amount or this amount, and well, okay, I'm done, and that's great. But that God calls us to actually talk to Him and say, Lord, what should I give? Lord, where should I give? Lord, how much should I give? Lord, should I or shouldn't I give to this situation? And I'll tell you a personal story about a time where I basically did not do this. A few days ago, we get a knock on the... Really? I'm sorry, all three of the girls are in the back going, oh, they're falling asleep during my sermon. You're only allowed to do that if you're on medication. All right, so, anyway, no, but guy shows up at the door, and it's this little kid, and he's cute, and he's going, will you help support the middle school, the middle school football program? And he's standing there, and he's got something or another in his hands. I think it gives you coupons or whatever, and I'm like, I didn't pray. I didn't stop. I didn't think. I'm like, how much? There happened to be a $20 bill over in my little key thing, and I went and I got that, and I did that, and I got the little thing and gave him the $20. Did I do anything wrong? No. Did I check with God about it? No, I didn't. Did I ask you, Lord, what am I supposed to do? Had God called me to be involved with this particular charity? No. It was me being lazy. It was because it was easy. If there hadn't been a $20 bill in my key thing, I probably would not have given him anything. I would have gone, I'm sorry, well, I hope you have a better rest of the day, and sent him on his way. And I think far too much of the time, when we choose to be generous, that's the way we choose to be generous. The way that's most convenient, the way that's simplest, the way that's easiest. But God calls us to something more than that. God knows that the resources we have can be used in incredibly strategic ways, in ways that really can change the world, in ways that we can't begin to figure out, but He can. And so just as David is following through on what God has placed on his heart, I think God wants us to follow through, to look, to find a way and a place to be generous. That which is in our heart, that which we are concerned about, that which we care about, and then find where there is a need and give to that need. Let's go on in the scripture a little bit. Now the king called Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, all that belong... I'm sorry, my mistake. I'm going to have to start a little bit earlier. Verse 8. And this is right after he's told Mephibosheth he's going to eat at his table regularly. He says this, and he prostrated himself and said, what is your servant that you should regard a dead dog like me? Then the king called Saul's servant Ziba and said to him, all that belonged to Saul and to his house I have given to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants shall cultivate the land for him, and you shall bring in the produce, so that your master's grandson may have food. Nevertheless, Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall eat at my table regularly. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. First of all, when Mephibosheth is given this news, he falls down on the floor and he says, why are you doing this for me? I'm nobody. I'm nothing. It reminds us that when we do give, we don't give because somebody's worthy or worthwhile. That we don't give because someone is deserving or trying hard or working at it. Mephibosheth had done nothing for David. He was never going to. He was never going to lead troops in battle. He was never going to bring resources for David. He was never going to save the day for this powerful king. And David gave to him because he chose to, obeying God's guidance. In the same way, when we give, we don't give because of the person we're giving to. We don't give because of their deservedness or how much of a good idea it is or what a great prospect they are. We give because the Lord tells us to. We give because He says, as He's freely given to us, we give to each other. And that means sometimes we're going to be taken advantage of. That means sometimes we're going to give money to someone and they're going to go spend it on booze and get drunk. It means sometimes we're going to choose to help someone out and they're going to fritter the money away and they're going to need more 2 days later. It means that sometimes as we give, people are going to make unwise choices with it. Which is kind of silly for us to be surprised. Because a lot of times when we get into trouble and need to borrow money, it's because we've made unwise choices. Wouldn't it make sense we keep doing so until we figure it out? We give in that way. We give for the sake of what God has called us to do. As we look at what that looks like in the Scripture, it looks like taking what we have to the most powerless, to the people who can do nothing for us, and giving to them. It's one of the reasons that through our Southern Baptist Conservatives in Virginia, we give backpacks to children, to school children in Appalachia. You'll remember last year we did that where we came together and all of the churches contributed backpacks full of school supplies. We participated in that. And then they got together over 5,000 backpacks that they sent to Appalachia to give to the school children in that area. It wasn't because of deservedness or worthiness or working hard. It's because there was a need and we met that need together. Every month there are projects that are a part of what our state convention does. Even here, giving to our food plaza. We don't check up on people's work history when we give them food. We don't ask them to take a drug test and send it off somewhere. We give because they have a need. And all we do to ask them to describe that need is say, how many people do you have at the house that you're feeding, and are there any babies? Because we've got baby food and we've got diapers. And if they need them, we want to give it to them. That when we come to what we're doing for Hodges Manor Elementary, it's not because the kids show up here and hug on us and tell us, oh yes, you gave us stuff. It's not because the teachers come here and say, oh, we can't believe you helped us out. We do it because there's a need there. And I think that we as individuals following Christ, and we as a church together, do best in the area of generosity when we quit fact-checking how much somebody deserves it, and we instead concentrate on the fact that God calls us to meet those needs He guides us to, regardless of the one whose needs we are meeting. My encouragement to you this week is to pray about what God wants you to do in the area of generosity. Now understand, I'm taking it as a given that you're going to give to the church, because we know God calls us to do this, and I've preached on this, and y'all know, but you don't want to have me stand up here going, please remember, you got to tithe, and so on. You know that. We get that. But I'm talking about those times where God grips your heart for a particular thing, for a particular type of research, for a particular disease, for a particular individual, for a particular social ill, and He brings it to your attention. And He connects you to it. And somehow, you begin to feel that tug, that pull of God yanking on your heart. And my encouragement to you is not to ignore it, but instead to start looking around. Start praying, start asking, and say, God, what exactly would you have me do? And I believe that He'll guide you in what that is. Because sometimes He guides us to give someone money. But sometimes He guides us to give someone our time. Sometimes He guides us to help someone out with something that they're dealing with. Sometimes He guides us to just be an ear to listen or a shoulder to lean on. He guides us in these different ways. And if we don't listen to Him and ask Him, then we're going to be handing a $20 bill to somebody when what they really need is someone to talk to for 20 minutes. That we're going to be stopping and commiserating when what God is really doing is saying, help them with their water bill. That unless we come before God and lay it out to Him and say, Lord, what would you have me do? It's so easy for us to miss the specifics of what will actually make a difference in their life versus what will make us feel better about giving things away. So my encouragement this week is to pray, to go to the Lord, say, Lord, how would you have me be generous? And to listen for His reply, to keep our eyes open for what He brings across our life, and then to respond. He will use whatever He calls us to do or give, no matter how big it is or how small it is, if it's in obedience to Him. At this point, we are going to